Hello, welcome to 10 at 10. My name is Michael Ramage. I'm the director of the Cyber Education Research Center here at Murray State University, and welcome back to 10 at 10, episode 123. 10 at 10 is brought to you through a partnership between Murray State University, Grow West, the Technology Council of West Kentucky, KY Innovation, and our local partner, Sprocket Innovation Paducah, and the Kentucky Innovation Station in Madisonville. Last week, we started talking about simple things that your organization, yourself, your family can do to better protect yourself in cyberspace. We started off with the fundamentals of passwords. Passwords are something that we've talked about before, but I wanted to make sure that we went back and we visited that because that is probably for most people one of the most fundamental things that you do on a regular basis for cybersecurity. It's simply putting in a password. So we wanted to start there, but there's 8 things that we can do. The 8th one being something for local governments that I'll talk about when we get to it. But these are steps that we can take to secure our organizations. And where we finished off last week was talking about password vaults. So it is really important to have long passwords. So a 16-character password, and they all need to be unique. If you're going to have a long, unique password, and if you're like me, I have 200 passwords to remember. How are you going to remember all of those passwords? And that's where we talked about a password vault. I use a password vault, a password manager. I use one password that it's what you see on the screen. This is not my vault. This is just a screen capture of a demo one. But this type of application will allow you to securely store all of your passwords. There's LastPass is one. There's a number of others that you can use. The important piece is that the file isn't stored encrypted. And the only way that you can decrypt the file itself to read the passwords is by putting in a password. So you still have to remember one password, but you don't have to remember 200 passwords. And more importantly, there is no need to reuse passwords to help you remember them. This is better than writing them down on a paper. This is better than reusing a password. This is the best way to remember passwords that we have today. These are files that are stored. Sometimes it's on your device, on your computer. Sometimes it is in a cloud drive, and sometimes it is in a cloud service being provided by the organization, the company like LastPass does that. One password does that as well, or can do that. There's a lot of different ways that we do this, and I strongly encourage you to consider doing this. Uh, yes, there is a risk based on whatever device that you're using or whatever service that you're using that their system could be compromised. Absolutely, there's that risk. LastPass has been breached a couple of times over the last decade, one pretty recent. But when it was breached pretty recently, it never actually got to passwords. The breach did not actually see the password, even the place where the passwords were stored. But even if they stole the file itself that had all your passwords, they're still going to have to decrypt that. And there's still going to be a brute force effort to decrypt the file to get in to see your password. So the odds of that happening are much smaller than the odds of somebody breaking into Facebook or a service online, taking those passwords and then reusing them onto another service. So the risk of you using a password manager and those passwords being compromised is much, much lower than you reusing passwords and one of those systems being compromised and being used against another. That's where your biggest risk is. So I would encourage you to do that. The next piece that I would strongly encourage you doing is using two-factor authentication on every device, on everything that you have, on every service that you have. If you're allowed to use two-factor authentication, please use two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication is available on Facebook. It's available on Twitter. It's available on most banks. It's available Um, it's available on my local network here at Murray State. We use two-factor authentication to authenticate. A lot of organizations do that. If not, you should consider it. If not, if you're not using it and it's available, you should use it immediately. Couple things about two-factor authentication. First of all, what is it? Two-factor authentication, by the name, sometimes it's called multi-factor. Um, but what that means is that you're using two separate factors to authenticate that you are who you say you are. So what does that mean? That means I put in a password, which is something I know. That's one factor. If I used, somewhere I was, that could be a second factor, or something I have, which is my phone. That's a second factor. Or if, a retina scan could be something you are. There are a lot of ways to look at two-factor authentication. And the idea is that if somebody stole your password, they would also have to have that second factor to authenticate. And what a lot of times uh, organizations will use, services will use, websites will use, is that it will send you a text or send you a code to put in. That is much better, much more secure than just putting a password. But let me say that it's not without risk. Uh, if you're using the texting option, it's much better. Do it now. Do it right now. But if there's an option of using an app like Google Authenticator or Duo, um, there's a lot of those apps that will generate a code within an app. That is harder to replicate than a text message. A text message, in theory, can be replicated. It's harder to do that in the Google Authenticator. It's harder to do that in some of these other applications. But don't let that, and please hear me when I say this, don't let that stop you from using two-factor authentication. If the texting is the only option, then still it's better. Because here's the deal. The overwhelming threat of stealing our password is malicious actors overseas. That is the threat. If somebody in Russia steals my password, they probably don't have access to my phone. So they would log in with my password and it would send me an authentication code and say, "Are you really in Moscow?" Obviously, I'm not. So that would trigger that I need to change my password because my password has been compromised. That's how it works. It's that simple. Now, let me also say that it's not without risk, because if I steal your phone and I'm able to put in your passcode, then I can also get um, your second factor uh, PIN code when that second factor authenticates, or you try to use that for authentication. So if I can steal your phone, you put in your password, or I steal your password and your phone. Let me make that clear. If I stole your password and your phone, then it's gonna send a code to me and I'm going to be able to get into your account. So yes, you still have to secure your phone. You still have to make sure that nobody can get into your phone. There's actually been things on the news of over the last week talking about in big cities like New York that people have had their phones stolen, and before they could unlock the screen, or before the screen locked, they were able to put in the code and change some things and take over the phone. We'll talk about that in the coming weeks on things that we can do to better secure our phone. But that risk of your phone being stolen is much, much lower than the risk of your password being stolen. So there's a higher risk of a data breach happening on Facebook or on Twitter or some other service that you're using than your phone. So understand that. Two-factor authentication is something that you should do right now. And let me finish by saying there's a lot of people that say, I don't want to have to do that every time I log in. It takes too much time. It's a burden. It's, whatever it might be. Let me explain. Used to, and some two-factor authentication still require this. So not all, some do. But used to, every time you logged in, you had to put in that code. And there's some security situations where that makes sense. But if I log into my Google account, as long as I'm on the same computer, I don't have to put in that PIN code every time I log in. It may be a month. It may be even longer than that for some services. So it's not a heavy burden. It's not that much of an extra lift for you to do that. And the security that it adds is so much greater. So please consider that. Please consider adding two-factor authentication. It will add much higher level of security to your user account, to your authentication process. It's easy to do. I highly encourage it. If you have questions on how to do that, how to implement that, my contact information is on the credit slide. Please reach out, talk to me. I'll help connect you with people that can help implement that for your organization. If you have questions, let me know. Thank you for joining 10 at 10. I'll see you next week back here on 10 at 10. Thank you. Bye.